All right. So Crispin, you've been in the public sector for a while now, and currently are a public sector employee.
Yep.
And I have a quite keen interest in public sector. So I guess just wanted to find out from you, for people looking at going into the public sector, what are sort of the skills, tools, or things that you could advise them? People more so people also who are coming from private to public that don't actually understand the public sector.
Yeah, well, if I think of anything, I'll let you know. No, seriously, there are many. Okay, so in terms of skills that people need to develop when they're coming into the public sector, the most important skill that anyone needs is the ability to write.
Yep.
So your English skills, your ability to communicate in concise but clear sentences for an audience that is time poor, articulating the problem, the proposed solution, where to get more information, and how things are going to proceed, is the single greatest skill that any successful public sector employee has. And if you want a successful public sector career, then those that rise to the top all have that ability.
Yep.
You need a certain degree of awareness beyond your little narrow world. And this is probably where people either who get over this pitfall either go on to have a wonderful public sector career or move into other areas. So when you want to make a change, let's say you're dealing with potholes in the roads, right?
Yeah.
Very boring, mundane thing, but that's your little narrow field. And you want to reduce that problem, right? Well, you have to factor in all of the different stakeholders involved in that issue, right? So what are you competing with in terms of resources? What is the end goal? Like, why do you want to fix the potholes? Is it to increase safety? Is it to increase convenience? Is it to satisfy particular stakeholders who are unhappy? So you need to be able to map that out in your own mind, preferably on paper as well, but when you conceptualize the problem, in order to come up with an effective solution that meets the needs of your ultimate stakeholders, usually political masters, right? So a politician or a minister has a set of stakeholders that they have to think about when they're making a decision. And so, fixing potholes might be a very simple thing, but you need to describe what resources are going to be allocated, who is going to miss out as a consequence of this decision, what kind of problems are going to be resolved by doing this, what the different stakeholder groups involved in this particular road consider when they've advocated for it. Are there other dissenting views that say, no, we don't want to do this, we don't use this road anymore? So to have a broad community awareness is a critical skill. And to be able to see things from every stakeholder point of view is very important. And if you can do that, I think the next skill comes naturally, which is patience. Because people in the public sector are often very frustrated at the pace at which things happen, but there is a reason for it. It's not just people are lazy, okay? It's that people, if they make a wrong decision in the public sector, the consequences are much greater than in the private sector. In the private sector, the problem is money, right? Oh, I've wasted some money, oh well. Whereas in the public sector, you can, actually reshape the whole direction of that particular area. And if you get something massively wrong, the consequences are lasting, not just for you, but for the whole community. So it creates the perception that everything is risk averse. I don't think it is risk averse. I think it is actually people haven't thought through risk, stakeholder, consequence particularly well. And when they do that well, then I think people are much more likely to be successful in affecting change for the community, which is ultimately why people are employed there, and also in their individual careers will be seen as an effective public servant. So those are the main skills.
So sorry. So what would you, for someone who's wanting to get into the public sector and is completely new, has no idea about the public sector, just goes, "Yep, I want to work for the public sector." What's sort of the one key bit of advice that you would give them? And I'm going more with this with people not understanding the challenges that working in public sector can offer, and not necessarily understanding things like, just a simple example, approvals processes. So yes, so what's this one or two single bits of advice that you'd provide to someone?
So there's a couple. Again, and you can divide into two. There is for your own individual career and for being an effective public servant.
Mm-hmm.
So for your own individual career, my main bit of advice is don't be too fussy about what agency you work for, right? All these people, they want to be ambassadors or they have a keen interest in a particular esoteric area of health, and they kind of ignore all other agencies. The biggest thing for your own career in the public sector is to start in the public sector somewhere, because it is much easier to transfer between agencies and departments and different levels of government once you're in the system than being an outsider trying to get in. So if you get a job in the public sector, it is so much easier to then move to your area of preference and to get the necessary exposure to do that. It's easier for the people on the other end to make that administrative change, and it's easier for you to build those connections. So my biggest bit of advice is, if you want a public sector career and you've got your mind set on something, that you don't have to give up on that. Just get into the public sector, do well, and then you'll be able to move into the right area. That's so for your own career. In terms of being an effective public servant, the first day that I entered the public sector, we were taken up to meet the leader, kind of, do the handshakes and meet and greet. And he said something to me that I have never forgotten, and is, in the private sector, you can do anything you like unless there is a law that specifically says you can't do it, right? But in the public sector, you can't do anything at all unless there is a bit of legislation that says you can do that thing, okay? And if you can understand that worldview, then you can quite easily adjust to the culture, right? You need to be able to build constituency for the work that you want to do in the public sector. In the private sector, you just go and do it. And this reaches through every single level. So if you have a friend who's pretty good at doing something and you want to employ them to do something, in the private sector, you just do that, right? Yep. And away you go. And so it's really quick and simple. And if it doesn't work, we've lost some money, whatever, right? Yep. In the public sector, it's not just about the money. It's about fairness for the community. It's about providing opportunities to everyone involved. Yep. It's about making sure that people aren't corrupt, because it's public money, so they need to have accountability. So again, like I said before, there's a broad area of consideration, which naturally is going to slow down the process, right? So to be, if you're starting out in the public sector, the first thing is not to be too critical. Yep. Be aware of, why things are the way they are. And that doesn't mean to say you can't have a positive effect. It just means that there'll be a long learning process before you go about changing the world, right? Because most people who go into the public sector, they have this great vision of they want to, get rid of all suicide in Australia or whatever. And it's a worthy aspiration. It's a good motivation. It's not something you want to lose. But I remember I was speaking to a graduate in Treasury, and she said, "Yeah, I've taken up professional cooking." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, that way every day I feel like I've done something worthwhile." Right? It was a very tragic thing to hear. And now she's gone on to do wonderful things in the public sector and has a successful career to this day. But, that initial shock of I thought I was going to do all these great things, and here I am writing minutes and, doing printing, and everything I put up gets rejected. that's don't let that grind get to you. Understand what the contributing factors are to something being successful and implementing successful change.
Yep.
And you'll be able to do that too.
So would you say that having change management as a skill in public sector is an advantage, or you should be looking at that?
Well, so there are different. Yes, I mean the answer is yes, but there are different forms of public sector change. And so one of the things to be aware of is the orientation and priority of whoever the government is of the day. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is they don't read the incoming government's platform, right? The platform will lay out what they want to do, their election promises and so on. And if you align your suggestion to their platform and what they want to do, you're going to have a really easy time of getting things approved. It's when people try and ignore the legitimate government's agenda and they try and force things onto the agenda that aren't supposed to be there, that things get held up. So, for example, timing, when we talk about change management, timing is a critical issue, right? Think about what's on the government's agenda of the day. Bring those things that you might have had on the back burner that are relevant to that up to the agenda. Build trust and with your political liaison, and that way you'll be able to affect change. But yeah, I mean the what I also see is a big problem for people who come from the private sector to the public sector. So there's challenges for grads who are aspirational and eager and very bright and keen to make a difference, who always wanted to be in the public sector. Then there are other people who have private sector backgrounds. Maybe they were really good at starting a business in India and got it off the ground like that, and they came to Australia and they wanted, they've moved into the public sector by happenstance. Either they're working for a government-owned enterprise or some other statutory body, or perhaps a regulatory agency in their area of knowledge. And so they need to, when they come in, they get shocked by how slow everything moves. And they get the perception that government is just this largesse where all these public servants who aren't accountable for anything they do, they get guaranteed jobs for life and blah, and then all the tropes start to come in. And that's simply not true.
It's quite the opposite, isn't it? In some instances.
Well, particularly at the high levels, right? Yep. So if you are recently, in the public sector, or you're a low mid-ranking public servant, there is more protections for you. But if you're a senior public servant, you're working all hours, you are largely influenced heavily by the political preferences of the government of the day as to whether or not you keep your job. You're completely subject to rather arbitrary amalgamations of different departments and functions and so on, and your job can just go at any time. And certainly, if you do something wrong, you will be held accountable at that level. So there's also a kind of a different career distribution. So there is a perception, and I haven't got a view on it, but there's a perception among private sector people that at the low levels, public servants are overpaid, and at the high levels, they're underpaid. Right? So, for example, if you come into the public sector, you get a pretty decent salary. You get, a degree of flexibility. You get support for maternity leave, all of those sorts of benefits, and a generally supportive kind of environment. Whereas at the higher level public servants, the pay scale flattens out pretty clearly, right? So at the senior ranks, yes, they're earning more than, average Joe, but they're not earning
what the equivalent of their private sector would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if they're a senior member of a government-owned enterprise and that equivalent enterprise was privatized, then that particular role, the remuneration for that role would be astronomically higher than it is for a government employee. Now, you can criticize that. You might say that CEOs in different companies aren't worth the money that they're getting and so on, and that's a debate to have beyond the scope of this. But certainly career progression, when you are if you rise to senior ranks in the public sector, almost certainly you have the skills and the qualifications and the background to be able to do other things that earn you more money at the same level. So one thing that kind of gives a bit of respect to these public servants is the fact they've opted not to do that. It's not the thing of last resort. Mm-hmm. So there's a perception, obviously, in some parts of the media where public servants are public servants because they can't do anything else, right? And look, there is some things to be criticised about that. Like it is difficult to get rid of people at the lower levels, and there are problems with that. But at the senior levels, they're there because they're trusted. Mm-hmm. They're there because they can work with different political masters, and they're mostly there because they have a commitment to public service, because they could easily get paid a lot more doing something else.
Yep. Mm. Mm.